Chapter 6. Going back is always difficult. Going back into subearth territory was like revisiting a nightmare. I'd had no problem crossing the border and was soon exchanging neat metalway for primitive earth and stone roads, tyres touching or skimming lightly. Remembering where to halt, I camouflaged the car and got dressed in shabby clothes. It was terrifying to be alone in that place. For one, I did not know how exactly to find Z's house. None of my other helpers opened up or confessed in response to my oblique questions. There was only the map in my mind and the incidents I had experienced that I hoped would help me recall the way. I should have used my digital, but I didn't want to leave any trace. Finding the outskirts of town was easy enough, but I missed the huts. At first I didn't recognise anything. Trying to blend into the background, I kept my eyes to the ground. Subs watched me. There seemed to be a conspiracy in their collective deformity, but they had only grown deformed through the bluntness of life. Limbs had been rubbed away. Even when I could smell their decaying bodies and glance quickly into their narrow white eyes, I never lost sympathy. Though it was daylight, fires still burned. There were hardly more people about than at night. More children scuttled between the adult subs' stumbling, clumsy legs, and there seemed more body dealers, usually painted up girls and women. I began to notice the cats strung up on poles and the rats led by strings and leather leads. At least these rats wouldn't bite the flesh of dying subs. There were many insects in the air also. Shops were open. Casually I looked inside some of these. Nothing appeared fresh or plentiful. As the centre neared and the streets closed in, I lost my way. The subs seemed to know I was not one of them, for they eyed me curiously. With their contracted pupils they appeared malevolent. If they had found out I was a lone upper, they would probably have torn me apart. My pace quickened with growing anxiety. Each turn I made must have taken me farther from the right route. I grew sick looking at the hobbling bodies, the scalded flesh, and the gaping, bloodless wounds. The subs were in the constant process of slowing. They were all heading for the stillness of eternity. If they were perfect, this would probably be by way of the long huts. And the others? I presumed they would be burnt on pyres, if not eaten by rats. Eventually I turned into a crumbling part of the town and was shocked to a standstill. I was not entirely lost. Without realising it, I had found my way to the area where Z had shown me the chimpanzees. And as if on cue, I saw a sub with teeth marks that had serrated the edge of her skin, a clump of missing flesh torn away. Had a chimpanzee bitten the flesh from her? Had she struggled, felt pain? Were her limbs numb to the savage biting? I hope so, and I pictured her defenceless, hobbling from the muscular grip of the animal. Was it content with its chalky flesh? Was it content to let her go, or did she fight it off somehow? Or did other subs feel the need to come to her rescue? Watching her stumble and pick up her dead legs just enough to hobble onwards, I realised what easy pickings the subs were. And yet there were others who had not contracted the disease, and I wondered if these were the ones from whom the shots had been developed by my own government scientists. As far as I knew, the ingredients used for the shots were grown in government-controlled labs, but it occurred to me for the first time how really, and perhaps artificially, expensive shots were, though I had little idea what they consisted of. It occurred to me then because I thought there might be an easier way to get some shots, and maybe a way to shoot them up everyone, sub and upper alike. It occurred to me then too because I was unprotected. In a short time I had thought thoughts that were alien to the likes of me. There was no reason to think in the side, laterally. We were trained not to. There was no need. Things worked and worked well unless you transgressed, unless you had relations with a sub or you got taken in by a beautiful sub girl. I suddenly thought about the baby, Adam, and my own child growing inside its mother. Up to that point, I'd never felt lonelier or more lost. Then I saw a sight that quite unnerved me and sent my expectations of that world tumbling. A procession of subs turned the corner of the crumbling, rubble-strewn terrace of houses. In the midst of this procession was held aloft a chimpanzee, tied by its front and back limbs to a metal pole. It was quite alive and struggled desperately and continuously. From time to time a gaggle of little able-bodied children poked darts into its fur. Two other children hobbled behind. With amazement I watched the subs march past, and I followed as the primate burst into deafening screams. It might have been crazy to follow, but I was drawn somehow. Before too long the subs reached a clearing. Appearing like a bomb crater, a hollow surrounded by houses opened up and revealed a huge fire burning at its centre. The procession moved down the hollow and spread about the fire. The chimp, or more accurately the pole holding the chimp, was balanced between two supporting collections of stakes. Beneath its now struggle-free swing, had it resigned itself to a terrible fate? There were the logs and kindling of a prepared fire. Next to it, and sending hot burning ashes into the air, the huge fire roared. A boy approached me. I must have been hanging back suspiciously. "Grun bin Grete?" Thinking quickly, I answered, "Aye, 'tis right." It seemed to satisfy him. All eyes were on the limply hanging body. Then a quite sprightly sub came forwards. Was he one of those who had actually captured the animal? And placed a torch of flame into the wood. Fire rose fast. There was a hush from those gathered, and the chimp expelled an excruciating cry. The sound rented the air. The sound shot down my spine. I realised I was not one of those people, that something deeper divided us. I turned my gaze from the screaming animal, but the smell of its singed fur clogged my nose. I realised again that this was not a game I was playing. Reckless as I might be, I was not share-shuffling. Oh, how I longed for the security of my wife and home. Cursing Z under my breath and the curves of her body, I slipped away. At least I figured the chimpanzees would be far away. The roads and streets were depressingly similar in their appearance. Shabby doorway upon doorway confused me, but I was sure once I saw the house of Z's other life I would recognise it. In retrospect, I was extremely naive, but as is often the way, this very naivety led me to a street I recall from the dark night of my previous visit. Walking up and down, I looked for clues. Still, I couldn't decide if it was the correct place. Did I need to turn down a back lane? I also knew that I wasn't to attract attention to myself. Already upstairs curtains were twitching, and the children who were playing, including some with the disease, had begun to take notice of me. As I neared a damp-smelling alleyway, I heard a voice calling. First looking around, I nipped into the arched passageway and held my breath. It was then that I realised this was the way I had taken with Z. The call came again, its direction from the back of one of the houses. A sub stumbled out of a connecting pathway, and I saw stump-like fingers on his hands. It was important for me not to gaze. There was nothing friendly passed between us. I held my breath. This was the closest I had come to the disease. Before I had been protected, even when I had fought off a sub with his knife, but on that second visit I was dangerously at risk. The disease passed me by in the shape of the sub, and I could only imagine the extent of his suffering. The door I was leaning on gave way. A hand pulled me through. It was Z's mother. The diseased sub lurched from wall to wall. Already his mind was decomposing, shutting out the connections which kept us sane and human. I had seen the eyes of some of the subs dulled by grog or by creeping insanity. I could still feel the air which had passed between me and the diseased body. The touch of Z's mother alarmed me. "Come," she said, "be getting you in, okay?" Inside the house a wasp buzzed wearily. I began to notice more things. The mother sat me down and made me a grog. The place smelt of unwholesome food and was generally damp. It was then I noticed how everything was sealed up, stoppers on the bottom of the doors and the windows shut tight. I let myself be taken over by the mother's almost indifferent hospitality. She was scared, somewhere deep, deep down. There appeared to be no police in subearth, and yet in our world we had heard so many stories of paramilitary brutality. Perhaps, I thought, justice was meted out by the mob, as was the case with the chimpanzee. "There," she said, "give me a drink." I felt awkward being there, imposing myself. I did not know what she knew about me. "Thank you," I said meekly. "You found yourself back then?" Her manner of speaking seemed more mannered than the others I'd heard in subearth, but not as cultured as her daughter or any other helper. "I have to see her," I said. "She's not here." "Where is she? What do you want to see her for?" I knew by the way the mother said this that she had been told about me. Z had confided in her. "I need her help," I said honestly. "Help what for?" "I need to... Look, I'm in trouble. I haven't..." And I mimicked a needle going into my arm. She didn't seem to comprehend. "A shot," I explained. The mother nodded her head. "Taking a chance then, Yisby?" "I've no choice," I said firmly. Now do you know where she is? She's been let down, the mother said furtively. We spoke some more about nothing. What was I to say to that woman? I was an upper. Her daughter had been my helper. Her daughter had transgressed, and it seemed being double-crossed, perhaps by her lover. The woman told me of the ills and deaths that had befallen her family, and how they, as clean ones, were often spat at or worse in the street. Credit, she used money, came through a son who worked in the fields, and from Z. The whole economy of subearth relied on handouts from the upper world. And again it dawned on me just how little I knew and how little crosstalk there appeared to be between government departments. And was I such a prominent figure as I thought in that government? She eventually asked me about Adam. I could feel her apprehension, but I was able to put her at ease. He was, after all, safe. After taking more grog and eating a pitiful stew, I rested in the room where I had slept with Z and baby Adam. The air was stale and lifeless. My metabolism seemed to slow. The mother had told me she would search for her daughter. I assumed she knew exactly where Z was. I wondered about Z's plans to be a helper in Adam's new family, but she was too smart to get caught out so soon. I could easily have found her. I had checked. Eventually I fell asleep and into a bizarre landscape of disturbed dreams. Rivers cut sways through loose soil. Then, as they swirled in malevolent currents, I waded across. Volcanoes sent up fountains of black liquid, and the earth dragged me down. Towns and cities out of a childhood interaction game suddenly appeared upon a flat desert land. No water, just black monolithic buildings. Then that dream cut to me held inside a cellar. No windows and no light. A huge wasp flew through the dank air, and then an extremely beautiful butterfly, quite out of keeping with the monochrome dream, landed on my face. But I felt some kind of needle prick into the side wall of my nose. At that point, it was almost as if I awoke out of my dream. Before me stood Z. I remembered that her face and body were blurred, but I could not say if I were dreaming or otherwise. Then the mother appeared, and they talked in whispers and seemed to care for me. I still remember Z's words. She said, "Adam, I'm waiting for him to come to me. I didn't want things to go the way they did. Believe me, he went too far. Don't think badly of me or him. We needed the money. There is a land far away. Remember, the mystery land. He will get me a shot and take the baby from your world. Then we shall leave here. But he went too far. He should never have bled you the way he did. He doesn't understand the danger. Like you, he doesn't understand. Forgive me." In the midst of my nightmares, her voice came as clear as a mountain stream. When I came to from my sleep, I realised how I ached all over and that sweat had poured from me. Z had disappeared. I rubbed the side of my nose. Couldn't feel anything. The mother gave me grog. I asked her the time. I remembered that it was night. I said, "Have I slept long?" She smiled. "Yes." "I must see your daughter." Smiling again, the mother said, "She has spoken with you. You've been ill. You have lain here for 2 days. 2 days? The woman nodded. "It can't be." "It is so." "Ill?" I asked. Z's mother looked kindly at me, said nothing. "I must return," I said, and forced myself onto my elbows. What has been wrong with me? Now that I recall all that transpired, I realise why the mother of Z cast her eyes to the ground and lied to me. For the day previous to the 2 sweat-ridden nights, I had been bitten by a spider. Must have been. It was a fluke, a low chance. It still happened. It happened to me. It happened in a disease-free house with the air locked in tight and with wasps buzzing in cracks and crevices. But back then I didn't know the truth, and I wouldn't have wanted to have known, just as I fought the truth as my toe began to go numb at the dinner party much later. The way out of Sue was as nauseating as the way in, but I had the true look of the disease to their practised eyes. Back in my own world, things erupted between Joe and I. Then we made up and I began to live a lie, and still the blackmail came. Credits were directed straight from my source. Less than before, and I thank God. Dinner parties and Joe's growing stomach veiled the reality of what was happening, until the numbness came. Then it was shortly after that I remembered the doctor who was my only hope. My marriage was fragile. I had no credit. I had the symptoms of the disease. If the disease was what my worst fears imagined, only the bent doctor could save me from a descent into the underworld, the slow deterioration of the body and mind. and then perhaps I would pray for the mind to be lost quickly. But I recalled the long huts with the subs laid out and their staring eyes. The mighty Xmas was approaching, the time of the holy fuck. My child would be born soon after. Before Z approached me, I was a good man with a good job. I vomited with the thought. I could no longer eat, but I kept up appearances, kept throwing parties, because I knew one of the bastards that I invited was the man who had brought me so low, and I would get hold of Z once the doctor had done his business. The doctor was my only hope, my only God-worship, holy fuck hope.